life as a means. None of us understands how much we resist thinking in a new way. In A History of the Universities of England, it points out that during medieval and Renaissance times, a large number of young students settled in Oxford around the early 13th century. Influenced vaguely by some new movement dubbed the Renaissance that was spreading throughout Europe at the time. The inhabitants of Oxford resisted the presence of these strange clerks, as they were called, as they hated them because they were studying something new. In those days there was no university as we understand it, and no college buildings. There was an uproar owing to some women in the town, so all of these students marched out of Oxford. Some went to Cambridge, others to Northampton and elsewhere. But there again all the inhabitants resented their presence, because they were studying some kind of new knowledge. These town and gown disputes took place for quite some time, before either Oxford or Cambridge were able to form a definite organized body, and commence the building of their own colleges. In like manner, we often see reflected in history what takes place in our own minds. Each one of us resists new thinking, we thoroughly dislike any forms of change. All history from a psychological point of view demonstrates this outcome, and how anything new is resisted. If we apply history to ourselves, then we find exactly the same thing present, and experience great difficulty in changing our minds. We notice a very powerful force of resistance. If we take our ordinary minds as the town, and our new minds as the gown, then there is always a struggle between town and gown. Consider what forces influenced all those young people to flock together and form centers of learning, not for war or revolution, but for learning. Conscious influences can only act upon humanity at rare intervals. When things happen to be open, it is taught. It is only at times like these that the influences of the side octave from the sun, esoteric influences, insert themselves between the terrific forces coming down the ray of creation. Things are opened for a moment, and then closed again for a long time. It is possible to notice that by change of attitude everything becomes different. What does a change of attitude mean? It means not minding in the same way, because attitudes are mental contrivances, not taking things with our minds in the way that we are accustomed to. To realize that we can mind differently, that we can transcend our present minds, is a wonderful visitation of consciousness, and a liberating experience. A change of attitude may make some situation which appears unsurmountable become nothing difficult at all. However, we are blind to our minds, with their ingrained attitudes and ideas, from which emerge our standard modes of thinking. We do not see the root of so much of our trouble, molded by the kind of mind that we have acquired mechanically, unchallenged and taken for granted. It is like having a gramophone with just a few records, or an iPod with very few tracks, and not realizing there are many other genres of music out there. To that form of mind, those are the only tracks that can be played. The mind is then a media player with a minimal number of tracks available in its flash memory. Everything else we suffer patiently, as it were, thinking, well, I mustn't mind, or I must try not to be bothered by all of this. That is, however, not working on oneself. It's a shortcut to martyrdom, with all the unpleasant aroma that accompanies it. We all know people who go about saying, I must not mind, or who am I to fuss, all of which is such pious nonsense, and extremely irritating. Of all the forms of unpleasant manifestations of other people that we must allow, understand, and endure, among the worst are such pathetic manifestations of that brave and injured suffering. The work is a powerful, clean thing, and so demands a great deal of inner sanitization, strength, and sincerity with oneself. Who are the unclean in the Gospels? Every form of hypocrisy and pretense, every form of looking down one's nose, every form of sighing slightly and rolling the eyes, or clicking our tongue, every form of pseudo-patience, all of this is uncleanness, and we come to know it, so it's a good stage to reach, when one knows it. It's important to observe ourselves from the perspective of minding. Then try to register moments when we mind something, and observe more deeply our intellectual center, our thoughts, ideas, and attitudes, if we can, to see why it is that we mind. Here also enter many forms of imagination, expectancy, many wrong ideas about ourselves and concepts. All the imagination that comes from false personality, all this is an arduous task, a very long way, and a journey in which we make mistake after mistake. However, if we acquire genuine valuation of this work, then we find the right roads, or are brought back to them in an indescribable way. If we are on this journey, which is strange and quite unlike anything cognized within our ordinary mind, then we will begin after a time to see what used to bother us so much, and now do not mind in the same way. This means that our mind is changing, that our whole way of thinking is changing, that we will inevitably be shown many places in our lives where we minded in the past so foolishly and so wrongly. This is the consequence of an increase in consciousness. That light of consciousness is shed into the past, into our time body, and from what we are conscious of now, where we can see its action upon us in the past, having misled us simply because we were accepting ourselves and our minds as we were brought up to, without considering who we were or where we were going. Every stage of slightly increased consciousness begins to alter us and to alter the past. The past is living within us, all around us, and not a long way off. Whatever we do now alters the past, as well as the future. Whatever we cease rightly to mind now will change in the past, and all those past similar mindings will dissipate, as a fog with the rising of the sun. Whatever new insight we gain now will give insight into our past and change it. Consciousness is that force that changes us. This is worth reflecting upon because it means that in recurrence, we will meet our more conscious self, as it is now, much earlier. Even perhaps at school, then feel there is someone showing us something, someone speaking to us. That guardian angel is yourself. How can this happen if we always mind in the same way as we have done, and never change our mind at all? Fail to see any reason to do so. Self-observation cannot increase without the help of the ideas of this work. Fortunately, the work teaching gives many angles from which to observe oneself. We cannot observe ourselves if we have no standpoint from which to observe. We must, so to speak, get out of ourselves in order to observe ourselves, otherwise we remain ourselves, such as we are and have always been. An increase of consciousness of oneself, which is the first aim of this work, means that we get further back inside ourselves, so that we see what lies in front of us, what we previously took as ourselves. This direction leads inward towards higher centers, through the higher parts of ordinary centers. The direction, gained from increasing self-observation, leads slowly to an increasing consciousness, both of what we are now, and what we have been in the past. All this leads to the only possibility of change. That process, the becoming more deeply conscious of oneself, seeing ourselves continually in some new light, in the light of this work, is called awakening. It is like an advance inward against an enemy, where here and there very tough junctures are defended that need to be surrounded, which can only be overcome gradually and then worn down. This entry into oneself is called, in the work, awakening. Here what the work teaches is very clear, and is shared in the Gospels and in the Tripitaka, however obscurely. The work says that we must first of all awaken, which takes some time. When we awaken enough, then we must die, because only then can we die to that which must be reborn. These are the 3 steps of rebirth, which is transformation. There is simply no other way. To try to die to oneself before we have awakened is to do something in quite the wrong order and reckless, which can lead to no result. To try to die to something before we have awakened and seen within is wrong action, because we are not ready yet. We do not know what to do and what to die to. If we try to die before we are awake, then we lack the conscious force to die to the thing in question. We may try, of course, but fail. Then the danger arises in becoming negative and feeling some degree of despair and hopelessness. When this happens, the whole sense and feeling of work may become distorted, owing to a sense of failure. This is a serious kind of temptation to be exposed to, as we can mistake it for becoming passive, and many other things. Nonetheless, the state is dangerous because we are letting in negative eyes that hate this work, through a back door, and soon all feeling of the work becomes dim, or even disappears completely. When this happens, we should sense that we are in bad company within ourselves, and going with wrong eyes. Sometimes we have to be in the wrong company, as this constitutes struggle, one from which it is possible to escape successfully only by not identifying. Not identifying is here emphasized because reasoning is utterly useless. When we begin to reason, we can come to any conclusion that we like, but tainted with emotional perception, which in this case is an impediment. Good and evil in us can only be seen through emotional perception in the light of this work. It's a question more of what it feels like, rather than what it seems. We use our reasoning mainly to justify. During the long stages of awakening, the ideas of this work are necessary. If we lack the ideas from which to observe ourselves, we cannot awaken from the sleep which life has induced in us since infancy. The sleep which life induced was formed by the ideas of life that we were born into, our environmental conditioning and peer pressure. So to awaken, we need influences from different sources. You cannot awaken from opium by taking more opium, and must find some antidote in order to awaken from the power that it has over you. How can one awaken from life by means of life? We cannot awaken from what life has built up in us by example, suggestion, imitation, and through imagination, unless we have an alternate system of ideas that does not belong to life. There is a cosmic reason for the sleep of humanity, and every fashion, each trend, all periods of life act on us to the extent that we can laugh at the customs of previous generations, their clothes, manners, beliefs, and so on, which means that we are not awake and fail to see how clever the hypnotism is, believing that we are awake through the power of comparison. However, we remain just as much asleep ourselves, so what can awaken us in a real sense? Only teaching can awaken us, only ideas that come from those in every age, who, overcoming the hypnotism of life, have become conscious. They have found the way out from the prison we all live in and do not notice, the prison of cosmic hypnotism, which is that prison of oneself that is constructed mechanically. To begin to free oneself from this inbuilt prison, from the ideas of everything that we have imitated and absorbed, some new ideas are necessary, and hence a new outlook. The idea that we are not one, but many contradictory eyes is one such work idea that begins at the exit of that prison, in which we are confined without realizing it, and have to be through necessity, at least to begin with. The idea that we are not one but legion is an idea that stands outside the ideas that life is planting within us. However, few people will apply this idea even if they hear it many times, because it seems to them that they are indeed a monism, that they possess unity. Beyond the prison of ourselves in which we are confined without knowing it, there lie a series of ideas that can lead to our own liberation, but only once they are correctly understood. P.D. Ouspensky pointed out that an idea is a very delicate and powerful instrument that can easily be wrongly handled. Surrounding us there are a number of ideas different from the ideas on which we are built. The idea of liberation has always existed, and led to all kinds of revolutions. People sense vaguely that there is something else, some kind of freedom, that they do not possess, but as a rule take it in terms of existing conditions, of outside rearrangements, of murdering some class or other, amassing wealth, power, fame, and so on. The ideas of liberation that surround us from outside the prison refer to ourselves, and not to material conditions. We are surrounded by liberating ideas whether we feel them or not. If we have magnetic center, then we feel that liberation actually exists. However, we may feel that it lies somewhere at some distant school in Tibet, or some secret order of the last century. Undoubtedly, the teaching of liberating ideas may indeed be found in some distant schools, but if you were to attend such a school, you would find that those liberating ideas are not accessible in the school. Their action lies in the effect that they have upon our inner lives, and the responses that we form to them. Schools, esoteric schools, transmit ideas that can liberate us. These ideas come from those who have liberated themselves, and this knowledge has always been handed on to others. The ideas taught are similar to the ideas that this work teaches. The work shares liberating ideas, but the action of those ideas will not be effective unless someone begins to think about them, to feel they must apply them to themselves. The illusion that there is such a thing as higher education, that we only have to receive instruction in order to reach some new state, is quite erroneous. There is no redemption possible for any of us through an ancient school of teaching, unless we learn and understand, then do whatever the teaching has advised. In the Gospels it is said that, "The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." It is not something outside that if we would but join, then we would find liberation. When it is said that the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven is within us, by the kingdom is meant a state in which the hypnotism of life no longer acts upon us, and in which we are invested with the influence of ideas coming from a quite different source. Take, for example, one of the ideas of the work from which we are taught to observe ourselves, and from which we must think and build up within ourselves some new point of view. There is the idea that people cannot do. Remember that an idea is comparable with some delicate and complicated instrument, which, if handled incorrectly, may instead do great harm. If you were to handle a massive generator wrongly without understanding its connections, you might easily be electrocuted. This idea that we cannot do is just like such a generator. It can furnish us with light, or it can inflict harm. We could misinterpret it, as many people do, as in them saying something like, "Well, if we cannot do, then what is the good of trying anything at all?" That is quite the wrong understanding of an idea that people cannot do. Everyone, said GI Gurdjieff, is doing the only possible thing they can do. Everything that is happening at this moment is going the only way it can possibly go. He was referring there to mechanicalness. As long as we are asleep, things will go the only way they can possibly go, by an infinite number of lines of cause and effect. However, this work teaches that we can fall under new laws, ultimately that we can reach a higher state of ourselves in which we can now do, in which we have real will. Such a state is certainly far from where we find ourselves at present. However, in applying these ideas to ourselves, that such as we are we cannot do, we have first to notice and observe over a long period of time what that means to us personally. We have to observe ourselves by means of these ideas of the work, then perhaps gradually realize one of the meanings of this tremendous idea. Begin to see that what we call our doing is really not doing at all, but mechanicalness that it does, and it changes with each moment. This is a preliminary stage which can lead to new experiences of oneself. It's a good thing to have new experiences of oneself, and if that occurs, by means of the light of this work, then those experiences will not make us desperate, but on the contrary, open up new aspects of understanding. From a correct realization of what it means that we cannot do, we begin to see what it means that mankind cannot do in general. Our understanding will no longer be theoretical but begin to become practical. We can grasp the idea that life for us cannot be an end in itself. People who exist primarily in their physical senses believe that life can be so vastly improved that it will become an end in itself, and that it will lead somewhere, if only they were rich and famous. But the work does not take life as an end in and of itself, because it says that life is under a great number of mechanical laws, which always keep it more or less in the same condition. The work teaches that we must take life as a means to some quite different condition. The objective of this work is that we should awaken, and it is solely about something that we can do for ourselves. For this reason, the work says that we are created as self-developing organisms. As long as we take life as an end in itself, hoping sooner or later to reach some kind of success and triumph in our lives, then we do not understand the aim of this work and are confusing the issue. If such an individual takes up this work, then finds that it does not lead to material success in their life, they will become disappointed. However, the work is not about such an aim. The work is about oneself, and about development with regard to life, to its accidents that can transform our entire being. If we can keep right in ourselves towards the work, if we understand the direction of the work, then whatever happens in life will not destroy us. We will not be surprised at what takes place. because we will know that life is simply like that, because we cannot do. Then success and failure will mean less and less to us, because we will not expect life to give us what only the work can reveal.